everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining this month's Fireside Chat. My name is Cymry Bilku, and I'm the Virtual Events Coordinator here at Waste Not, Want Not initiative at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. Today, I have the privilege to chat with Gomery and Concordia Professor Emma Despland. Before I introduce Kim and Emma, I would like to highlight two goals of these Fireside Chats. The first goal is to better connect our different communities, so we have put all their full names and encourage you to add us on LinkedIn. Some of us also added our Twitter handle. And the second goal of these Fireside Chat is to learn from one another. Kira, who is now hiding in the background, will join us towards the end and moderate the audience Q&A. So please write your questions in the comments, and by all means, talk to one another. I also encourage you to think about this question as you listen to our chat. What are your thoughts on banning leaf blowers? I invite you to share your thoughts on that question with us and with another in the chat. Waste Not Want Not is a proud member of the Coalition for Green and Quiet Neighbourhoods. Coalition Quiet is a citizen group that aims to educate people about the ecological importance of leaves and to get a ban on gas leaf blowers in Côte des Neiges, Notre-Dame des Grâces, Borough, and beyond. So I'm honored to introduce Kim, chairperson and co-founder of the Coalition for Green and Quiet Neighbourhoods. Kim also volunteers as a butterfly ranger with the David Suzuki Foundation. I am also excited to welcome Professor Emma Despland, who is an ecology professor in the biology department at Concordia, a fellow of the Loyola Sustainability Research Center and of the Science College. She teaches invertebrate diversity and researches the basis of terrestrial ecosystems and interaction between herbivores, insects, and the plant they feed on. Kim, an interesting statistic I found that 1 hour of leaf blowing emits the same greenhouse gases as driving from Toronto to Halifax. Can you elaborate a bit on the environmental impacts of leaf blowers?
I love that question. Yes, leaf blowers are damaging in many ways. They're damaging, of course, the most obvious is noise, but also there's the pollutants, the toxins that are emitted, and there's also a certain amount of CO2. Starting with noise, the noise is indeed noise pollution in the sense that it's not only annoying to our ears, it actually causes low-level hearing loss in the users of leaf blowers over time, especially contractors who use them for prolonged periods of time. It prevents birds from hearing their song of the male bird in order to find their mate in the spring. So noise is really a pollutant. There are all kinds of toxins that are associated with these two-stroke engines. The two-stroke engine is convenient because it's lightweight and it's cheap, but it's compact. But unfortunately, it doesn't fully combust the fuel and the oil. So the toxins are emitted directly into the atmosphere. Cars used to use this type of engine, but now cars have gotten very clean. That's why the statistic that you mentioned is so shocking. Two-stroke engines emit non-methane hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide, which contribute to forming smog, acid rain, and they affect tropospheric ozone as well. So I have some links I can send you. There's all kinds of articles that go in detail about the toxins. Sure. And those toxins aren't only affecting us humans, they're affecting the entire ecosystem in the natural world. And the small insects, being their body mass is so tiny, are more affected than we are. And there's an insect Armageddon going on anyway. We're also blowing around those leaves and destroying the habitat and the overwintering leaf cover for the insects. So it's a big problem ecologically.
Yeah, and speaking of the ecosystem, I'm a professor of biology that studies terrestrial ecosystems. What are the negative impacts that leaf blower can cause in the ecosystem? What were your research findings on leaf blower removals in general on invertebrate communities?
Okay, so I think maybe start off with thinking about soil as an ecosystem. Soil is really magic because we kind of think of it as just dirt. And however, most of our wastes go into soil, and then magic happens and food comes out of it. And that magic happens is the science of ecology. And so quite a lot of what we know about soil has to do with nutrient cycling. So a lot of wastes, well, what we would call organic waste, so that includes waste, that obviously includes like leaves or grass clippings, but also less palatable things like, fecal material and dead animals get broken down by decomposers. They get broken down into forms that plants can use, and then plants take up those nutrients to grow. Obviously, when you remove all these organic inputs to the soil, you stop that from happening. So when you're removing the leaves and other kinds of organic material, you're depriving the soils of food. So you're depriving the plants of the nutrients they need to grow. And you're also breaking down the whole community of decomposers, of the recyclers who are actually going to be changing this organic matter into plant nutrients. So there is a kind of feedback loop here that when you have leaves, you have a healthy community of lots of, earthworms and insects and other soil organisms, various invertebrates that can then break down those leaves and turn them into nutrients. So paradoxically, the better community you have, the faster your leaves will actually get broken down. You leave them there, but in the spring, they're often gone. The other point probably worth mentioning is the way in which leaves are habitat for a lot of insects, including a lot of things we think of as desirable. So there are a lot of native butterflies, fritillaries, and the Canada swallowtails, those big black and yellow butterflies you see in the spring, they overwinter in the leaves. So do the woolly bear caterpillars. I don't know if people know they're the kind of black and reddish striped ones you often see in the fall. You see them walking around in the fall because they're looking for a sheltered place to pass the winter. If that sheltered place is the leaves on somebody's front lawn, you remove them, the caterpillars have nowhere to go. And this might sound kind of trivial, my front lawn. But there's been satellite imagery taken from NASA in the United States, and they calculating how much lawn area there is, and there's more lawn than any other crop, which is kind of mind-boggling. There's more lawn than, corn or wheat or any of the other crops we grow. So the actual areas of lawn that we plant are huge. And so the more we make them into this kind of sterile monoculture, the more we're destroying habitat for anything else.
Okay. And as a professor, do you feel that enough people are informed about the impacts of lawn care practices on the environment, other than just the noise? But more generally, do you feel that universities are properly teaching their students about the climate crisis that's happening?
Yeah, it's okay. So it's obviously a bit hard to talk about universities in general. I get the impression that we're doing a pretty good job about the science. So certainly in biology departments, we're teaching about ecological principles. We're teaching about nutrient cycling. We're teaching about climate change. So the science is there. To what extent it's translating to what do we do about this? I think that's where the question arises. Yeah. So for instance, Concordia, we do have the College for Sustainability and Diversity, where students can look at sustainability issues from very multidisciplinary aspects. So it's including not only the science, but engineering, the business school, the humanities, the arts, social sciences. But you've got to choose to do a minor in sustainability. Most students don't, right? So to what extent are engineering students thinking about how to build things in a post-fossil fuel world? Or how much are business students learning about green economies? I think those are maybe bigger questions.
I agree. As an engineering student, we do have one class on sustainability, but it is not as enforced. It's kind of given once or twice in the 4-year program. So definitely it's lacking there.
Yeah. I think I also have a kind of more philosophical point. I don't know if I should.
Go ahead.
That's okay. I have a couple of children in elementary school. I was in an event once where these 5th graders were presenting about plastic pollution in the oceans and how destructive this is for marine life. So these kids were aware and motivated, 5th graders, so 11 years old. And then after this, they served snacks that were individually wrapped in plastic. So the message we're teaching them is this is a big deal, this is important, but we're not actually going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And that's a message that probably creates anxiety, probably creates a feeling of powerlessness, telling people this is really, really bad, but we're not going to help you get beyond it, puts young people in a hard situation. And I think that's maybe why there's been so much, I guess, young people speaking out against this, because they have been kind of trained to this powerlessness.
Of course, yeah. And Kim, how can people watching help your coalition achieve its goal of banning leaf blowers? Because it seems like a really big problem.
I think that people can do what we've done. We've created a petition, so obviously they can sign the petition. They can write letters to the editor, which we have done a couple of times, or write op-eds. They can think about subscribing to the David Suzuki newsletter and converting I've converted my lawn into a garden, and many of my neighbors have done the same. It seems to be a trend in NDG and probably elsewhere too, in Montreal at least. And certainly once you've converted your lawn into a garden, I mean, the leaves just fall and they're absorbed into the soil, at least in my garden. I don't rake anymore even. But if you're not willing to go that far, you can just, if you're using leaf blowers currently, you can think about using an electric leaf blower instead of a gas leaf blower. Or you can create, like one of my neighbors has created turned part of her lawn into a garden. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. She's created a strip which is plants now. So that's good for the butterflies. It's good for if you have native plants. And it's less lawn, it's less water. So it's good generally for the ecosystem. So I guess I'm rambling here, but they can certainly sign the petition and think about alternatives to like a push mower instead of a gas mower too, because I should mention gas lawnmowers are a big problem, even bigger than leaf blowers, but we're starting with leaf blowers because that's something that annoys people really
more. And where can they find the petition to sign?
I can I'll share the link in the chat, and I'll give it to Kiro, and he can keep.
All right, perfect. And Emma, this pandemic has really highlighted the importance of evidence-based policies and the need for scientists to take an active role in informing governments and decision makers. How do you see your role as a scientist and an academic within the citizen group? And how do you advise your colleagues to engage at the community and policy levels?
Yeah, so I think in kind of ecology departments, there is a feel of, I guess, particularly among students, there are a lot of students who are motivated and they want to do something and they want to be constructive, but it's not always easy to see outlets, particularly, of course, paid outlets, right? Because eventually, you know, there's always opportunities for volunteering, but people eventually often want, you know, a real job. There are, however, increasingly getting to be programs to fund academics working with citizen organizations. So there is funding from both the federal and provincial governments where citizen groups can work with academics on projects that are of interest to the groups. So for instance, I've had a couple of students doing literature reviews on this question of leaf blowers and what it actually does to soils. I have another student who's working with Urban Nature on the Falaise Saint-Jacques, so documenting the biodiversity on this you know, unmaintained, unprotected urban forest. So there are options there to promote, I guess, collaboration between academics and citizen groups.
Okay, thank you. And Kim, can you share your reflections on the economic impacts of a ban like this? Like, what happens to landscapers? How did the general community react to the coalition's goal so far?
Well, anecdotally, generally, we're getting really positive response. Of course, the people that are mostly coming to us are people that don't like leaf blowers. But I think that overall, I had a workman come to my house who was working for my neighbor with a leaf blower, and I just went outside in a very friendly way, said, you know, can you use an alternative? And he smiled and threw it back in the truck and got out something else and said,
okay.
Sure. So he had no problem with that. I've heard that, well, first of all, it's not good for there are now, somebody pointed out that there are now companies that are, you know, marketing themselves as ecological companies, landscaping companies, you know, green landscaping. And so these companies are ones that you can hire if you want somebody, but you can also just ask. And we certainly are going to do a presentation to landscapers and to talk to some of these avant-garde landscapers who are using other means. It might cost more, I'll be frank. I mean, it does cost more to use the two-stroke engine is a cheap engine. It's a cheap, bad engine. So if they're going to use better quality equipment, they're going to use more expensive equipment. It's going to cost more, and that's as it should be. You know, I'm all for paying people fair wages and for the work that they do. So it's not all doom and gloom for landscapers. I think they can probably, it might cost them more initially. The city could certainly subsidize the purchase of electric equipment if they want to use the blowers still. CO2, I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. But overall, the cost is not prohibitive, and the city should shoulder some of the transitional cost for its own workers in order to transition, maybe help them subsidize new equipment and so on.
For sure. They're already doing that with cars, like the transition to electrical vehicles. There's a lot of subsidies for that. So definitely it's something the government can definitely get on board. Yeah,
I
and
mean,
Emma,
I can maybe just add to that. I mean, the city of Montreal does have a plan to be carbon neutral by 2050.
exactly.
And there are also legislation at the federal government phasing out the sale of gas-powered two-stroke engine lawn equipment. So this is going to happen. You know, it's sort of, it's a sunset technology. It's on its way out. So we might as well transition earlier rather than later.
For sure.
Um,
And yeah, would you be able to expand on the discussion to other lawn care practices, like lawn mowing, for example, and how does that affect our ecosystem? Or is it similar to leaf blowers?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe one thing that's worth mentioning too is that these things are always very like place specific. Ecology is very much a place-based science. So we know in general that removing leaves and removing organic matter from ecosystems is not a good idea. In practice, however, maybe advice that was devised for California is not going to work in Montreal because it's not the same organisms involved, it's not the same climate, it's not soil types, So while we understand the principles, if you want to actually be able to apply those principles in the place where you are, you need local science with like local knowledge. And there are several people in kind of Quebec and the Montreal area working on that. So, for example, I have a colleague, Tanya Handa at UQAM, with her graduate student, SCV Couji-Gagnon, who are working with the city of Montreal, studying the effects of different, basically leaving litter practices on the soil invertebrates. So saying, you know, which animals are actually living in there, because we know in general there probably will be lots, but nobody's actually looked at it here in Montreal, so that they're doing that here. Similarly, there's Raphaël Proux in Trois-Rivières, who's worked with the city of Trois-Rivières on lawn mowing. So that's getting back to your question, where they're looking at what is the effect of lawn mowing on not only the invertebrate communities, but the health of the lawn. So also on whether the lawn is able to survive droughts and whether it's more or less susceptible to white grub, which is a pest that destroys lawns. And they've basically found that the less you mow it, the better health your lawn is. So what's come out of that is that for sort of southern Quebec, the recommendation is to leave your lawn at about 7.5 centimeters tall, which is, you know, maybe that much, which is longer than most people do. And that's going to have a lawn that both is going to resist drought better in July. So that's less watering in July. It's going to be better habitat for a bunch of insects that need to hide in the grass because if the grass is too short, they can't hide in it. They worked out with the city of the city of Trois-Rivières, that if they left the lawns that length, they'd save $300,000 a year, which is, well, they're mowing less often, right? If you mow every 2 weeks instead of mowing once a week, you know, that's saving the city money.
For sure. That's a great point. I would like to end with a question we ask on every Fireside chat is, what does being a global citizen mean to you?
Kim, are you going first?
Or? Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Me? Okay. I kind of like the quote about how on Spaceship Earth, we're all crew members. Because I think the notion of crew member and citizen also includes we're not just passengers who are here for the ride. We're kind of part of how things work. I think to me, when you talk about global citizen, it does also very much highlight the fact of how lucky we are in Canada and how much more privileged we are than people elsewhere in the world. And we're all in it together, and maybe we have a bit more of a role, a bit of a different role, given, you know, the high levels of resources and democracy that we have that others might not.
Exactly. I think we have like the resources to actually be the leaders and set a great example for like other countries to follow as well. And Kim, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I'm sure you've all heard, think global, act local, and that's very concise way of remembering it. It's just that we have to think about the whole world and realize that we're all connected, and realize that we can't just focus on our own interests and as if we lived in isolation, because this is a globe and this is an international community. So something that's happening somewhere else in the world is climate change is the perfect example of how we've all connected to create this global problem by thinking about our own personal interests in our own countries. Like Canada, overall, per capita, we have huge emissions. But if you look at us on a global scale, we can say, oh, well, we're not as bad as some smaller countries. Well, we're not, because we have 1/10 of the population. But we have a responsibility, and as Emma very wisely pointed out, we're really a privileged society in the global context. So we have a responsibility in the global context to do more than our share, and to even do per capita our share. We're terrible emitters.
I think I could.
There's a lot you can do on a local level, and one thing like right in your front yard, that's a good place to start.
I think I can maybe add to that there is a kind of paradox that in some ways, yes, we're more privileged and we have more means at our hands, but on another side, we're more kind of used to these bad habits that we're so kind of ingrained, we don't realize there are alternatives. And that's one thing I find really enriching traveling. To a certain extent, I've seen this in Europe, but even more so in South America, the way people do things differently, that's actually much less resource intensive, consuming much less, and there's solutions that work okay. And there are things that here in North America we might never have thought of or seen or dreamed of, but we realize other people are doing this and it works for them. So, it could work here too. So we do
the fireside chats, and I find that's great because they look at the global perspective, and you meet all kinds of leaders from all over the world that are doing amazing things.
Yeah, and you talk to people from other places, and they really have new insights.
Well, thank you so much. Every change starts off with a conversation, so this was great. I'm sure you informed many of our viewers. I'm gonna let Kiro now discuss about the Q&A.
Hi. Well, thank you very much, Emma and Kim, for all the great discussion, and thank you, Cymry, for doing a wonderful job. You're getting a lot of praise out there, and you've done wonderful. I think it's great. So I'm wondering. So first of all, people in the audience, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat, and I'll direct them to Kim and Emma. I did have a couple of questions. One is, yesterday when we were talking, Emma, you were talking a little bit about the history of lawns and where they came from, and I thought the whole story was very fascinating. I'm wondering if you would share that with people.
Yeah, sure. So, this is the kind of, okay. So basically, the history of the lawn is basically a British tradition. Britain having a climate, of course, where it rains a lot. So having a very green lawn is relatively easy to do. You cut it, it grows back. This then got brought to the United States, and of course, with the mentality and definitely the whole kind of colonial imperialist idea, doing like they did in Britain is what you wanted to do. So the idea of lawns got incorporated as part of American traditions. And then people in the United States started traveling away from New England to different parts of the United States. They brought with them this ideal of what you want your house to be surrounded by is a bunch of green lawn. And so people have started implementing that in places where the climate is completely inappropriate. So where we're seeing this the most is in the Southwest, where the amount of irrigation, the amount of watering you need to keep a lawn in a desert is huge. And a lot of that water is it's groundwater, and it's fossil water, which means it's water from rain that happened thousands and thousands of years ago, and that rain is not going to come back. So if you take that water out of the ground and put it on your lawn, it's gone. And it's not available for drinking. It's not available for feeding trees. It's not available for feeding rivers. It's gone. And that's gone because people want lawns, and people want lawns because they had this idea coming back from Britain that this is what you want. So certainly in the Southwest, they're trying to say, look, we live in a desert, maybe try and have an aesthetic that fits more with the actual place where you are, rather than importing an aesthetic that comes from a different place with a different climate.
Yeah, I think an expression you mentioned, you used yesterday was ecological disconnect, which I thought
so there's this disconnect that they're living in a desert, and yet what they value is an aesthetic coming from a very wet climate. There's indigenous leaders from southern Chile who talk about sort of the same thing, where they did a survey where they asked people, name 5 plants, name 5 animals. And they realized most people would be naming non-native species, because most people do not come from southern Chile. They've come from sort of central Chile, and so they're going to be naming plants and animals that are not local. And the only people who know the local plants and animals are mostly indigenous people, and they're often mostly, of course, the people who are, disempowered and marginalized and impoverished, and they're the ones who are in touch with the place where they are, and the people who are kind of higher up in the power levels are not in touch with this particular place. And that makes a difficult disconnect.
Well, I'm from Egypt, and we don't really have lawns in there, and so the whole thing was quite foreign to me, which brings me to the next question. So Diane is asking, what do you think about clover lawns, and would that help decrease the percent of grass lawns? My first question is, what is clover lawns in the first place? Because I have no idea what they are.
Okay, well, clover, clover, first of all, isn't a European plant, so it's not actually native to North America, but it's been here for like 400 years. So it's here to stay, it's part of what we are now. And then clover, it's within the family of legumes. So I think anyone who's a vegetarian or a vegan knows that legumes have more protein than other plants. That's because all plants in those families can take nitrogen from the air and make it into protein. Well, they don't actually do it themselves. They have bacterial symbionts that do it for them. But that also means that legume plants can grow in poor soils where other plants cannot, because they don't need nitrogen fertilizer. They can make their own. So clovers are actually, it makes them a beneficial plant for enriching poor soils. And it also explains why they do so well, because they can grow where others can't.
Okay.
So I think adding clover to your lawn, yes, can be helpful. But I still think the idea of having a relatively long, 7.5 centimeters, which, go ahead.
Yeah, I love what you said about nitrogen fixing, and I didn't know anything about clover lawns, so I'm glad that I learned something. But I also, it comes to mind just the word lawn. I think that at different times in human existence, and without even knowing it, without being really conscious of it, we have certain aesthetics. I think you said we have an idea of what is beautiful, and that idea of what is beautiful actually changes. Like, it's easy to think of examples like in the museum a couple years ago. They had the exhibit that was talking about the aesthetic where people were obsessed with the Middle East. What was it called?
Orientalism.
At the time, apparently redheads were seen as like all women, like the most beautiful women were redheads and so on. And then now you might say, like in the 60s and 70s, the most beautiful women were blondes, or in China, the most beautiful women were the women with the tiny feet. But as you see, and aesthetically also in the natural world, we see lawns as beautiful, but that we're looking at that through the paradigm of a very Western, as Emma pointed out, really imported from Great Britain, idea of what's beautiful. And I look at a wildflower, like just wildflowers in a field, to me, that's beauty. To me, that's beauty. And I see, butterflies and insects. And every time I pass a park or an open space, I just see a sterile monoculture and I see lawn. I think it's dry, it's ugly. I'm tired of all this expanses of green. It's not beauty to me. But I realize that people are conditioned because that's what we've grown up thinking of as beautiful. And we have to kind of question our own assumptions about beauty. If we were to suddenly decide as a society, or just to have more alternative ideas of beauty, because beauty, we would see beauty in native flowers. Yet, as Emma said, we don't even know our native flowers. I'm 60 years old, and I'm just learning this year about all kinds of native flowers. And I'm really having trouble because in my own lawn or my own garden, I have all these flowers that are, some of them are even invasives, and I didn't know. So we have to change our idea, and I would like to see, like, especially public spaces like parks, I'd like to see them transformed into, wildflower gardens, wildflowers, and more trees, more flowers. I don't even like lawns anymore.
There's been some suggestion of people in urban design talking about how for many public buildings, and particular apartment buildings where people live, we have this idea that you have the building and then you have this huge, vast lawn around it. And that gives off an impression of like wealth and chic, and this is where you'd want to live, right? But if you're actually living in that high-rise building, this huge lawn, like think of the buildings along Cavendish, like there's a building, there's a big lawn, and then there's like this massive road. That lawn is not actually a usable space for the residents of that building, because you're kind of right out there, you're in front of the street, it's not really a place you can use. But if instead they planted a hedge around it to make it a kind of more private space, and then maybe put in, playground and some benches and some paths and maybe some flowers and some bushes, not only would it maybe make better habitat for animals, but it then becomes a space that the people living in that building could use. They could go sit on the benches and relax. They could have picnics on the picnic tables. Children could play. People could go for walks. So having these huge expanses of just green, it's not actually space that people can use.
That's true.
Yeah, I remember when I first came from Egypt, I always thought the dandelions, the golden dandelions, were very beautiful. And then every time you cut the lawns, it made me cry, because I wasn't environmentally conscious at the time, let's say. I came from Egypt, and as much as I think people outside the Western world tend to have already best practices that are sustainable, it's part of culture, it's part of habits. It's not necessarily because we think the world is gonna get destroyed because of plastic and all these things. Even though that's true, it hasn't been something that I was conscious about. But so when I came here, and
if I could maybe just
please go ahead.
That. It's it was like that in the West a few generations ago.
Right.
I think a lot of people had sustainable habits because they were cheaper. And it's been destroyed in the West, and it's being destroyed elsewhere too now. So
yeah, I think what makes me cry is that I look back and I mean, look at what I'm hearing from what's being done in Egypt, for example, like my family and friends and all this stuff. And I was like, it didn't used to be this way. I think we're exporting a lot of our bad habits instead of trying to learn from the best practices that has been practiced for centuries. So it breaks my heart when I see that. But when I look at the dandelions and I find how beautiful they are, and then when people cut them because of lawn mowing, I think it just made me think of Kim, what she was saying about how beautiful, what our definition of beautiful is. I think this is one example of how beautiful dandelions is, and just keep cutting them. Kim, I when I joined the coalition, I also joined in part to learn about how citizen advocacy works, like how citizen group advocate for various laws. And there was quite a few interesting tactics that we're always discussing, like asking questions in council. And I'm wondering if you can share some people who are watching and have a cause that you're very strongly about, how they can go about it.
How to
do citizen advocacy. What kind of tactics you think are effective?
That's a really good. I was talking to someone the other day. Who was it? One of my neighbors, and said he had started. Well, actually, somebody I was gardening with on the De Maisonneuve Butterfly Way, and she said she had a block party on her block, and she just put little notes in neighbors' mailboxes and invited them to a Sanka set, and it turned out to be a Sanka Neuf. Everybody was having so much fun. And that was the first time that the people on her street had actually met each other and talked to each other. And she's moving now into a place on Hampton, as it happens. And she said her neighbors are so sad to see her go, and they're still inviting her back because they have these block parties every year now. Mm-hmm. So, and once you know people, so I think it's knowing your neighbors and not being shy and saying hello and talking to people and getting involved in your community and anything that moves you. Certainly, I mean, with this anti-leaf blower group, a lot of us knew each other because LEAD now organized a climate debate a couple of years ago before the elections, and so we all met. And we had a great time planning the climate debate. So I think if you just get out of your comfort zone a little bit and reach out and get to know your neighbors or get to know people in your community. Emma's already part of a huge community because of the university. I mean, you, all of you. So that's a community already ready-made. But for someone like in my generation, it's a little more, you have to work a little harder to kind of create opportunities for community. And once you know people, you'll be amazed at all of the talents and the knowledge. And I'm always blown away. Sorry. by all of the talent in my, like, just the group that we have, Green and the Coalition for green and quiet neighborhoods. All the different diverse talents in that group is just amazing. So
yeah, I mean, what I found really interesting is that many of the people who are in the group already know their municipal leaders and politicians, and already had this kind of personal relationship. I have no idea which municipality I'm in or who's in what council. Like I don't know any of my neighbors, and I think it goes back to what you're saying. You need to meet people, and then try to figure out how to navigate the structures. It was also the first time I attended a municipal council meeting. When we were planting those questions and getting to see what the mayor and what other people on council stand on these issues. So there's a lot to
I'm glad
learn.
you're mentioning all the things I forgot to say. Yeah, that's true.
Oh, that's not what I meant.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that would be a plug to tell people to try going to municipal council meetings. You can go as a member of the public. Nobody's going to corner you and make you have an opinion on anything. But also often because the municipal level is where people have the most impact. The groups are smaller. So, you're one of 50,000 instead of one of 30 million. So your voice is more power. And also the municipal level is often where many of these decisions actually get made. So the federal government can maybe support, but ultimately it's quite often the cities are where these decisions happen. And there are municipal elections coming up in Quebec soon. So it's a good time to get involved.
Well, on that note, I think I would like to thank you both for your time and for your thoughts. I have learned so much, not just today, but from our interactions within the coalition, and I'm looking forward to getting that ban done, and not only in the NDG but across Montreal and Canada. And thank you, Cymry, for moderating. You're very brave. I think you're the first person in the team to moderate one of those firesides, and I'm very happy you stepped up and you did a wonderful job.
Yeah, I got to learn so much. So this was really interesting for me. It was fun.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and thank you to everyone who attended.
Thank you.
Your comments. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.